There's a person who never says no. They help everyone who asks, put others first constantly, and pride themselves on being kind and accommodating. They're known as the nice one, the reliable one, the person everyone can count on, yet somehow they're also the person everyone takes advantage of, the one whose boundaries get trampled and the one who ends up exhausted and resentful while receiving the least respect. This isn't coincidence. This isn't bad luck. This is niceness functioning exactly as psychology predicts it will, creating weakness instead of strength. The relationship between niceness and weakness isn't what most people want to hear. Society teaches that kindness is strength, that being nice makes you a good person, and that treating others well will result in being treated well in return. These beliefs are comforting and morally appealing. They're also psychologically naive and demonstrably false in many social contexts. Understanding why niceness creates weakness requires looking at the darker truths about human social behavior, power dynamics, and the psychological mechanisms that govern respect and influence. First, it's crucial to distinguish between kindness and niceness, because they're not the same thing at all. Kindness is doing good for others from a position of strength and choice. Niceness is being pleasant and accommodating from a position of fear and need for approval. Kindness comes from abundance and security. Niceness comes from scarcity and insecurity. A kind person helps others when they choose to and can afford to. A nice person helps others even when it hurts them because they're terrified of conflict, rejection, or being perceived negatively. The motivation is completely different, and the outcomes are completely different. Niceness is fundamentally about self-protection, disguised as generosity. The nice person isn't primarily thinking about the other person's well-being. They're thinking about avoiding negative judgment, maintaining their image, preventing conflict, and securing approval. This is why niceness often feels manipulative to perceptive people. There's an unspoken contract. I'll be pleasant and accommodating and you'll like me and not hurt me. When that contract isn't honored, when the nice person's accommodations don't result in the approval they were unconsciously seeking, the resentment emerges. The niceness was transactional all along, just not explicitly acknowledged. This transactional nature of niceness creates the first source of weakness. People can sense when behavior is motivated by fear versus strength. Humans are extraordinarily attuned to status signals and authenticity. When someone is being nice because they lack the confidence or courage to be anything else, that weakness is palpable. It shows up in body language, in the speed of agreement, in the inability to hold boundaries, in the desperation for validation. Other people pick up on these signals unconsciously and respond accordingly. The response is not increased respect. It's decreased respect, combined with increased willingness to exploit. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, this makes perfect sense. Throughout human history, individuals who could be easily manipulated, who couldn't defend their resources or boundaries, and who prioritized others' approval over their own interests were lower status and less valuable as allies. The ability to set boundaries, to say no, to tolerate conflict, and to prioritize one's own needs when necessary were all signals of strength, confidence, and high status. These remain the signals that command respect today. Niceness signals the opposite. It signals that the person can be pushed, that they won't fight back, that their boundaries are negotiable. This is where the psychology gets uncomfortable. Respect in human social hierarchies is not distributed based on moral goodness. It's distributed based on perceived strength, confidence, and the ability to enforce boundaries. The person who is too nice to say no, too accommodating to push back, and too afraid of conflict to defend themselves is advertising their low position in the social hierarchy. Other people respond to this signal automatically and unconsciously by treating them accordingly. This doesn't make it right or moral, it makes it predictable based on how human social psychology actually functions. There's a concept in psychology called the doormat effect. When someone consistently allows themselves to be treated poorly without consequence, they train others to treat them poorly. The behavior that gets tolerated gets repeated. If someone accepts disrespect, cancelled plans, being taken for granted, or having their time wasted, they're teaching others that these behaviors are acceptable in this relationship. The nice person thinks they're being understanding and patient. What they're actually doing is removing all consequences for bad behavior, which guarantees that bad behavior will continue and escalate. This connects to operant conditioning, one of the most fundamental principles in behavioral psychology. Behaviors that are rewarded increase in frequency. Behaviors that are punished decrease in frequency. When a nice person accepts poor treatment without objection, they're rewarding that treatment with continued access to their time, energy, and resources. The person treating them poorly learns that they can continue this behavior without consequence. From a pure behavioral standpoint, the nice person is training others to exploit them through their own failure to enforce boundaries. The nice person often doesn't see it this way. They see themselves as giving people chances, being understanding, not being judgmental. But there's a difference between giving someone a genuine second chance after they've shown remorse and change, and simply accepting repeated poor treatment because you're too uncomfortable with conflict to address it. The first is actually kind and strong. The second is nice and weak. The distinction matters enormously because outcomes are completely different. Another psychological mechanism at play is the concept of reciprocity and social exchange. Humans have evolved sophisticated systems for tracking social debts and exchanges. When someone does something for us, we feel psychological pressure to reciprocate. But this reciprocity system only activates when the favor feels genuine and voluntary. When someone is constantly doing things for others out of desperation for approval, the favors don't feel genuine. They feel needy or manipulative. This triggers avoidance rather than gratitude. People start avoiding the nice person because interacting with them creates this uncomfortable sense of unpaid social debt, combined with awareness that the person's motivations are unhealthy. This is why nice people often report feeling used and unappreciated. They're keeping track of everything they've done for others and feeling resentful when it's not reciprocated. But the reciprocity system wasn't activated in others because the actions didn't come from genuine strength and choice. They came from fear and need. The nice person created their own resentment by doing things they didn't want to do, for people who didn't ask for those things, while expecting unspoken returns that were never agreed upon. It's a self-created trap built on poor boundaries and fear of directness. There's also the problem of predictability and respect. Psychology research shows that people respect those who are somewhat unpredictable more than those who are completely predictable. The nice person is utterly predictable. They will always say yes, they will always accommodate, they will always prioritize others. This predictability removes all mystery and challenge from the relationship. There's no need to work for their approval or access because it's automatically granted. Things that are freely available have less perceived value than things that must be earned. The nice person has made themselves too available, too easy, too guaranteed. They've removed their own value through oversupply. In contrast, the person who sometimes says no, who has clear boundaries, who can't be counted on to always accommodate, maintains value through scarcity. Their yes means something because their no exists. Their time and energy are valuable because they're not freely available to everyone. This isn't about being mean or difficult for the sake of it. It's about having genuine standards and boundaries that are enforced consistently. That enforcement is what creates respect. The nice person often confuses being liked with being respected, but these are completely different things. Being liked means people enjoy your company when it's convenient for them. Being respected means people consider your needs, boundaries, and opinions, even when it's inconvenient for them. The nice person might be liked in a superficial way, but they're rarely respected. People might say nice things about them behind their back. Oh, they're so sweet. But those same people will walk all over them without hesitation. Respect requires the ability to enforce consequences, and the nice person has removed all consequences from their relationships. This shows up clearly in the workplace. The employee who never pushes back, who accepts every additional task, who works overtime without complaint, and who never advocates for themselves, is not getting promoted. They're getting more work. Their niceness is being exploited for productivity, while the rewards go to people who negotiate, set boundaries, and advocate for themselves. The nice employee thinks they're demonstrating value through accommodation. They're actually demonstrating that they can be exploited without cost. Management isn't evil for taking advantage of this. They're responding rationally to the incentive structure the nice employee has created. There's a gendered dimension to this that's important to acknowledge. Women are socialized to be nice, to be accommodating, to prioritize others' comfort over their own needs. This socialization creates systematic disadvantage because it trains women to exhibit the exact behaviors that lead to being undervalued and exploited. But the woman who tries to be nice in professional settings often finds herself doing everyone's emotional labor, managing everyone's feelings, and being passed over for leadership because she's too nice or not assertive enough. The niceness that was demanded of her as proper feminine behavior becomes the very thing that holds her back. But niceness as weakness isn't only about external exploitation. There's also internal damage. The nice person is constantly suppressing their authentic reactions, desires, and boundaries in favor of what others want. This creates a disconnect between inner experience and outer behavior. Over time, this disconnect leads to loss of self, inability to know what one actually wants, and deep resentment. The nice person becomes a stranger to themselves, having spent so much time performing niceness that they've lost touch with their genuine preferences and feelings. This psychological self-abandonment is one of the most damaging aspects of chronic niceness. When someone consistently prioritizes others' comfort over their own truth, they're sending themselves the message that their own needs don't matter, that their feelings aren't valid, that they don't deserve to take up space. This becomes internalized as low self-worth. The nice person isn't just weak in others' eyes. They're weak in their own eyes because they've trained themselves not to honor their own boundaries, needs, or truth. The alternative to niceness isn't cruelty or selfishness. It's genuine strength and authentic kindness. A strong person can afford to be kind because their kindness comes from choice and abundance rather than fear and scarcity. They help others when they want to and can afford to, and they feel no guilt about saying no when they can't or don't want to. Their yes is genuine because their no is real. This creates clean relationships without hidden resentments or unspoken contracts. Strong boundaries are actually what make genuine intimacy and generosity possible. When someone knows they can and will protect their own needs, they can be truly present and generous with others without resentment or secret scorekeeping. The person with strong boundaries can give freely because they're not giving from depletion or fear. They're giving from overflow. This is actual kindness, and it's received completely differently than the desperate accommodations of niceness. Learning to move from niceness to genuine strength requires several difficult transitions. First, accepting that being disliked by some people is inevitable and acceptable. The nice person's core fear is rejection and negative judgment, but attempting to avoid all negative judgment means contorting yourself into whatever shape others want, which is both impossible and soul-crushing. Strong people accept that they can't please everyone, that some people won't like their boundaries, and that this is fine. The approval of people who only like you when you're accommodating their convenience isn't worth having. Second, learning to tolerate conflict and discomfort. Niceness is often conflict avoidance disguised as agreeableness, but conflict is a normal and necessary part of relationships. It's how boundaries are established, how differences are negotiated, and how authentic connection is built. The person who can't tolerate any conflict can't have any genuine relationships because they're too busy managing everyone's comfort to ever be real. Strength requires accepting that sometimes people will be upset, and that's not your responsibility to fix. Third, developing internal validation rather than relying on external approval. The nice person is constantly looking outside themselves for evidence that they're okay, that they're good enough, that they're acceptable. This creates a desperate need for positive feedback that drives the niceness in the first place. Strong people have developed internal standards and self-respect that don't require constant external validation. They can afford to be disliked by some because they like themselves. Fourth, practicing boundary enforcement even when it feels uncomfortable. Boundaries without enforcement are just suggestions. The nice person often has boundaries in theory, but never enforces them because enforcement requires tolerating another person's disappointment or anger. But boundaries only become real through consistent enforcement. This means sometimes disappointing people, sometimes being seen as difficult or selfish, and sometimes ending relationships with people who won't respect limits. This feels terrible at first for someone used to constant accommodation, but it's the only path to genuine respect. Fifth, recognizing that people who only want the nice version of you don't actually want you. They want a service provider, an emotional support animal, or a resource they can access without reciprocation. Real relationships involve mutual respect, reciprocity, and seeing the whole person, including their needs and limits. Anyone who withdraws when you start having boundaries wasn't actually a real connection. They were using you. Losing these pseudo-relationships is addition by subtraction. The psychological research on assertiveness supports all of this. Studies consistently show that assertive people, those who can express their needs and boundaries clearly while respecting others, have higher self-esteem, better relationships, more career success, and lower rates of anxiety and depression compared to both aggressive people and passive people. Niceness falls into the passive category. It looks peaceful on the surface, but creates internal turmoil and external exploitation. Assertiveness feels difficult initially, but creates genuine respect and healthier dynamics. There's also evidence that people actually trust assertive individuals more than nice ones. When someone is consistently accommodating and positive, others can't tell what they really think or feel. This creates uncertainty and distrust. The person who will sometimes disagree, who has visible standards and boundaries, is actually more trustworthy because their agreement means something. Their positive feedback is credible because their critical feedback also exists. The nice person's constant positivity becomes meaningless because it's clearly not genuine assessment, it's just their default mode of operation. This connects to the psychological concept of differentiation, which is the ability to maintain your sense of self while in relationship with others. Low differentiation means your sense of self shifts based on who you're with and what they want from you. This is the nice person, constantly shape-shifting to accommodate others. High differentiation means you maintain your core self regardless of external pressure. This is strength, and it's what allows for genuine intimacy because the other person is relating to a real self rather than a performance. The path from niceness to strength isn't about becoming harsh or uncaring. It's about becoming real, boundaried, and selectively generous rather than indiscriminately accommodating. It's about moving from fear-based people-pleasing to choice-based kindness. It's about developing the internal security to tolerate others' disappointment and the self-respect to honor your own needs. These are hard transitions, especially for people who've built their identity around being nice. But the alternative is continued exploitation, resentment, and the weakness that comes from abandoning yourself in favor of others' comfort. Understanding why niceness creates weakness isn't about judgment or shame. It's about accurate perception of social dynamics and psychological reality. The nice person isn't morally inferior. They're operating from fear and using ineffective strategies based on faulty assumptions about how human social behavior works. Once those assumptions are corrected and better strategies are learned, everything changes. The person becomes genuinely strong, genuinely kind, and genuinely respected, rather than superficially nice, secretly resentful, and consistently exploited. The final truth is this: people don't respect niceness. They respect strength that chooses to be kind. They respect boundaries that are consistently enforced. They respect someone who values themselves enough to say no when necessary. And they respect authenticity more than accommodation. Being nice makes you weak because it advertises that you can be pushed, that you won't defend yourself, and that your boundaries don't exist. Being strong allows you to be genuinely kind because your kindness comes from choice and abundance rather than fear and depletion. That's the difference between weakness and strength, between niceness and genuine goodness. And understanding that difference changes everything.